Good morning, hope you're all well. Today we're going to look at stress, inflammation. We're going to have two amazing guests on. We've got Sherry Ruano, who is let me get this right, arrhythmia specialist. We'll explain what that all means a little bit later on. And also we'll be joined by Dr. Aseem Malhotra, driving the show. Over in the background over there is, really the foreground, not the background, is my son Jack and my daughter Jessica, driving the show today live in the studio. There they are. Driving the show from home is Nick DeVries and Poppy. They'll be working in the background, also putting tomorrow's show together. If you are new to us, let me just quickly explain what we're all about at the Food Bank Show. 3 purposes. Purpose number 1, with all the guests that helped write my book, Fat and Furious, loads of doctors, nutritionists, some of the world's leading chefs, they can be dialing in and we can be talking to them, and they're going to be giving us advice about how to best build up our immune system, build up our defense system. Because seriously, after social distancing and washing our hands, the third best thing, the third most important thing for looking at after our health at the moment is building up our immune system. So should the flu or COVID come knocking on the door of our family, we've got the best immune system possible to fight it off. The second big purpose, and hence the show name, the Food Bank Show, is we're building awareness for the food banks across the UK. At the moment, they have a lot of need for our support in terms of putting food into those collection boxes within our local supermarkets, and at the same time desperately need our cash, because rather than running all their 1,200 food banks out of the normal locations, many of them, because of social distancing, are having to do home deliveries. And more than ever, their demand for food from families across the UK that are going hungry right now is higher than ever. So together I plead, let's help support the UK food banks and the Trussell Trust. They operate around 1,200 food banks. The third thing we're trying to achieve is to put a smile on everybody's face and say, look, coming out the other side of this event, I know it's hard for lots of people financially, mentally, physically. COVID's a really bad thing in so many ways, but there must be a silver lining on the other side. Maybe because we're not all traveling so much, maybe because we're not going to work so much, maybe we may start to see a reduction in the problems of global warming. Maybe because Greg's, McDonald's, and all those fast food restaurants are shut and all the restaurants are shut, maybe we're going to change our eating habits, and by changing our eating habits, maybe we're going to make ourselves much more healthy in the long term. Maybe we're going to live longer because we're going to change our eating habits. So that's all what the show's all about. It's about health, it's about well-being, it's about supporting others, it's about live and interactive every single day. And we'd love you to comment and ask questions as we go along. Now, just before Sherry joins me, every day we ask you, what did you cook for the first time yesterday? Back to that whole thing of taking control of your diet, because we believe the third best thing for health is eating real wholesome foods. Get rid of the pasta, the rice, all those full of carbohydrates and low in nutrition. Replace them with healthy foods. So we're asking you to share what you're cooking at home every night on our Facebook, which is Primal Living's Facebook. Send us in your photos. In our house, I'll just quickly tell you what we're doing. We're having a competition. We've divided into 3 teams. It's my wife with Jessie. Jack is with little Lily, 12-year-old, and they cooked last night, and I'm with Tom, and we're having a competition, and we're scoring each other on the meals each night. So last night, Jack and Lily had scored really well. They did a starter, which was healthy, a lovely salad. Then they did a main course. Have you got photos?
No.
Oh, you haven't got photos?
We'll show them tomorrow.
We'll show you tomorrow. They did this lovely pork and lettuce as a main, and then for a pudding, they made a lovely yogurty, natural yogurty with lots of berries. It was absolutely fabulous. They scored more points than I scored the day before, but let's see what my wife does. So say again, mate. What? Up. You're pointing at me? You're going to show photos?
No, I wish I had.
You haven't downloaded them this morning. Okay. Well, we'll get your photos up tomorrow. The other thing we're doing, and by the way, that's a competition. At the end of lockdown, we're going to pick a winner, and the prizes are fantastic. Now, every day also we ask you about a certain food type. How much sugar do you think it converts into inside the body? Now, we did eggs the other day. We forgot to do it yesterday. And it was a bit of a trick question because we thought we'd throw a goodie in there, the alternative to cereals. Because the great news with eggs, don't know if you got the slide there, Jack, there we go. None. The answer is you can eat as many eggs as you want and you will not be putting sugar into your bloodstream, unlike cereals which turn into sugar, unlike bread which turns into sugar. The good old egg, well, that's really, really, really healthy for us. Right, enough from me. Let's get today's first guest on, who is Sherry Ruano. And Sherry is a arrhythmia specialist and stress management expert. Good morning. How are you, Sherry?
Hi, Steve. Good morning. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, fantastic. So nice to see you again. The last time I saw you, we recorded a podcast, and that podcast, coincidentally, goes out this Sunday. So I think many people are looking forward to that one. So tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what a arrhythmia specialist is. Arrhythmia, sorry. And let's then get into today's topic of stress, inflammation, and I guess how we de-stress.
Yes, right. So I am a clinical nurse specialist in the NHS in arrhythmia, and I'm a stress management expert in central London. That's me.
Excellent. And what's the relationship between arrhythmia and stress management? Is there a link between the two?
There is a strong link, actually. Recent research studies have shown that, especially in dysfunction and a problem that's called atrial fibrillation, the chances of someone developing more paroxysmal atrial fibrillation increases in very stressed patients. So there is a tremendous link. So the heart responds to our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings. So the tendency to develop arrhythmias also increases as we have more stress.
Got it. Now, I've looked on the NHS website and it says 5 tips for mental wellness. They say connect with other people. That's the first thing we should all be doing. And what we're recommending is we connect with maybe people we haven't been in touch with for a while. Maybe give a call, go down your little black book or your iPhone or whatever phone you've got and find somebody you haven't spoken to for a while and reconnect. It's a great thing we should all be doing with spare time on our hand. The second thing the government recommend is be physical and physically active. So getting out, walking, light exercise is very important for mental wellness. The third thing the NHS are recommending is to learn new skills. So maybe, and this is one we keep recommending, because you're going to have to change your eating habits, why not devour a book or two on cooking, recipes, and try new food for the first time. We're certainly in our family having great fun doing recipes. Well, my son did cheat yesterday. He didn't make his up. He actually stole one out of my cookbook, and I'm trying to do new one. I'm doing it properly. I'm learning new ones every day.
It's original.
But it's original. You made one tweak, I think, so you could call it your own. But yeah, learn new skills. Maybe you're going to get into sewing, knitting, maybe crafting in any way. So try and learn some new skills. The government also say one of the top 5 things for mental wellness is to give to others. The emotions that are released, the serotonin that's released when we become more giving, actually makes us feel good about ourselves, makes us relax, and helps our mental wellness. And then the 5th thing they say, and this is why I asked Sherry to come onto the show today, they say pay attention to the present moment. In other words, mindfulness. And one of Sherry's areas of expertise is mindfulness, and we're going to ask her to talk us through that. Have we got Sherry back yet?
Not yet.
Jack?
She's on her way.
Sherry's back on her way.
Oh, we do.
You're back! Hey! The wonders of...
I'm sorry.
Don't worry. The wonders of technology. Sherry, I just, while we lost you there, read out the 5 things the government are saying about mental wellness, and their 5th point was be in the present, be mindful. What do we mean by being mindful?
Okay, mindful comes from mindfulness, and mindfulness is the practice of maintaining awareness in the present moment state. It is a practice of noticing your feelings, your thoughts, sensations, and also just being fully present in where you are, what you're doing, and what is going on, right? But what's going on both within you and also what's going on the outside. Um, it's also important to mention that the practice of mindfulness, right, is also the practice of being aware of your emotions and trying to acknowledge them with no judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it, in simple terms, what mindfulness means is really being present in the moment, what you're doing, how you're feeling, what you're feeling, who you're sharing a moment with, and that's in simple terms.
So it's kind of being aware of your feelings,
Yeah.
but also not being too hard on yourself, is what you're saying? Because I know I'll always beat myself up if I feel I'm underperforming in any way. So it's kind of being aware of your feelings and at the same time not being too hard on yourself, because I guess at the moment everybody's going to be a little bit anxious, aren't they? And therefore, especially in this difficult time. And what we spoke to another wellness specialist the other day, and what she was saying is it's very much about try not to think about the past too much. Don't worry about tomorrow, the day after the day after. Turn off the news a little bit. As long as you're social distancing, keep washing your hands and eating real food, then just concentrate on today. Don't think about how long the lockdown's going to be, whether it's weeks, months, who knows? You and I can't affect that. So let's just worry about today, and not worry about today, but let's get the best out of today with all the other things that the government's saying around, connecting with others, try and stay physical, be active, learn new skills, give to others. All that, if we do those things today, then I guess just focusing day by day is the thing we should be doing at the moment.
Yes, I would totally agree with you, Steve. And with the recommendation from the government, I would also add taking a break from watching or reading the news, right? Because that puts you straight away into the future, right? And creates fear, creates frustration, creates sadness. Not so much to what happened in the past, but it actually puts you in that position where what is going to happen, what am I going to do? So from what the government currently recommends, this is one of the most important things that I've done. Taking a little break from the news and also making time to unwind and slow down.
Right.
And mindfulness is brilliant for that.
Yeah. No, that's really, really, really good advice. Jack, I'm just going to check the sound quality there, because what I'm hearing in my earphones, we're breaking up quite a lot with Sherry, but we think it's okay. Well, I'm going to go and look at what questions we've got coming in for you, Sherry, because they're all very, very good at answering and asking questions of us. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. MG says, hi, Jack, Lily and Tom. I had broccoli in honey and chili with peanuts. Oh, that's good. Sounds very tasty. Indeed, that does. Yeah, we're hearing that your voice is cracking up, Sherry. Can we, Jack, suggest anything to Sherry to increase the bandwidth that we've got?
Not at the moment. I'll get on it.
Jack's onto it. He's going to try and increase the bandwidth, because some people are finding it difficult to actually hear everything you're saying. So yeah, I mean, the key thing there, isn't it, is that chunking it up one day at a time, focusing in on today. And we had Robert Lustig on the other day from the USA, and he was saying, it's really, really important that sort of last hour before you go to bed to come off watching the news, turn off all the technology, do everything you can to really get into a peaceful space. And of course, I guess the news makes us more anxious, and therefore, as long as you're doing everything you can with your social distancing, almost just ignore the news, turn off the news. And sadly in the UK, and I'm sure it's probably the same worldwide, is the newspapers and the TV, they know the news that sells, sadly, is bad news. For some reason, we're addicted to bad news and not good news. I remember about 2 years ago, we had this big heat wave, and everybody was so happy, and everybody was on the beaches. It was all fantastic. but all the newspaper headlines concentrated on one person that had had a heat stroke. It's just like, oh, please concentrate on the good stuff. And why is nobody telling the good news at the moment? Why is the headline not, because we all know about corona, we're all keeping our distance now, why is the headline not how the planet's recovering so well at the moment? How the oceans are getting bluer, the sky's getting cleaner, and we're probably we're probably doing the best thing ever. It's the best holiday for our planet ever.
I agree, completely agree. So back to what you said, taking a little time before you go to bed. There's a very, very interesting term called resilience, right? And mindfulness can be used as a tool, a mechanism for you to recharge from adversity, right? And that's why I completely share the views with that person, because taking an hour before you go to bed is so important, because that's also how you recharge and how you bounce back, right? Which has a lot to do with resilience. And nowadays, it's a time in which we need to learn how to be more resilient.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. One thing that you could do, Sherry, to get the sound a little better, if you turn off your speakers, you might be getting an echo, Jack, do you think? Do you think Sherry might be getting an echo from her speakers? But then she won't hear me.
Yes.
Oh, we're still working really hard. We're working really hard to get your sound better. Have you got any headphones around, Sherry, that you could plug in?
I do have headphones, yeah.
Yeah, if you plug those in, we'll come back to you in a moment, because that we find cuts out the echo. So maybe you can go and find some headphones, because what you're saying is absolutely brilliant. So Jack, while Sherry gets the headphones, let's set up. In fact, no, let's do today's food fact. So every day we're doing a food fact, and it's another competition. If you just write down as many food facts as you can remember, so we've covered broccoli, cauliflower, eggs, and I'm not going to tell you anymore, you've got to go and find them in previous shows, but if you can write down the list of all the food facts, whenever we finish this show, whether it be a week, a month, 2 months, whenever we come out of lockdown, we're going to ask you to write down as many food facts that you can remember that we covered, just what the food was. And then again, we'll have another competition, and the prize will either be £1,000 worth of free jewellery that's been donated by Gemporia, or a weekend stay at a boutique hotel in Warwickshire. And if you want us to, Jack, myself, Poppy, Nip will all come along, and we'll have a nice, healthy dinner together. So today's food fact is nuts. And before we get into nuts, here's an interesting thought. Peanuts, probably the most famous nut of all, actually isn't a nut at all. Peanuts are actually legumes. So here's the other interesting thing. When you go next time on a flight, and those of you that fly will hear this all the time, somebody has got a nut allergy on board, therefore nobody on the plane can have peanuts. I always ask the question, well, what nut allergy is it? Because if somebody's actually got a peanut allergy, they haven't got a nut allergy at all. They've got a legumes allergy. Anyway, that's just a by the by. Nuts are fantastic. They're a great source of nutrients. They're a great source of antioxidants. They're a great source of fiber. Have loads of nuts in your diet, other than when you're talking about peanuts and cashew nuts. Just be careful if you're trying to lose weight, because while they're super healthy for us, they do come with a lot of excess energy as well. I always say to my kids, peanuts are great, but just remember the amount of energy in each peanut is about the same as in a Tic Tac. Now, that doesn't mean to say a peanut and a Tic Tac are the same thing. Tic Tac, no, that's not good. That's all bad sugar. But peanuts are full of energy. So if you're trying to lose weight, don't go massive handfuls, just have a few. Now, Sherry, are you back with us?
I think I am.
Oh, the sound's, much better.
It?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'm so happy.
Yeah, the sound is much better right now. So I know when we did our podcast together, you were talking a lot about yoga, and maybe with people now with a bit of time on their hands, we're all locked down, certainly this Easter weekends, give some tips, some practical tips that people that maybe have never thought about mindfulness before, never taken time out to meditate, do yoga. What's the starting point for somebody that's never done it before?
The starting point in my, and this is just my opinion, right? Everyone just, do what works best for them. But in my opinion, we should actually move the body first before we do any mental health practice such as mindfulness or meditation. And the reason why I'm saying that is because sometimes we think that meditation or mindfulness is the best thing that we can do when we are going through difficult times, and perhaps it's not, right? So what I recommend is first to move the body, practice some yoga or some cardio exercise, some aerobics inside the house, inside your house. And so once the body is a little bit more open and loose, and then you can actually move a bit better, then you sit down and start observing your breath. Right? And then you observe also how you feel, where you hold intention. And then is when you can slowly observe your thoughts and see what your mind is doing. Right?
Okay.
Sometimes when especially when we're very stressed or when we're anxious, if you sit down or if you sit on a chair and you start observing your thoughts, the mind is very erratic. Right? Mm-hmm. And unless you are a serious meditator or a very serious practitioner, it's very challenging for us to control our thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can go into what it's called a downward spiral, right? Mm-hmm. Into overthinking as well. And that it's not that great. And it's very difficult to break that, okay? So moving the body, distracting the mind, focusing on your heart rate, on your breathing. And then once the sympathetic nervous system slows down, then you actually can access your mind in a little bit more efficient way.
And for some people, would that mean doing the same process when they're walking, or do we really need to be in the home with no other distractions? Or, for me, my thought process is clearer if I'm out in fresh air and walking, or is it different for everybody?
It's different for everybody, but at the moment we are in a situation where we are all locked down. So that's why I was giving the recommendations at home. But if you can go out for a little walk and having some fresh air, that's fantastic. That's even better. But obviously for those that need to be at home, such as those that are high risk at the moment, there's so many things that you can also do from your own place.
Excellent. And give some more examples. And I will, before we do that, just say, if you're trying any new physical activity, remember, whether it's stretching or anything, just remember, don't get injured. That's the first thing I want to say. Yeah. Because I remember once saying to somebody, right, get into press-ups. And somebody followed my advice and they were in their 70s and hurt their ankle. How they hurt their ankle, press-ups, I don't know. But so I always say, look, the first thing is whatever you do, if you're totally physically inactive at the moment, start with the simple movements. And maybe let's pick somebody. Let's say my mum and dad, they're both late 70s, they're both housebound at the moment. What's the first thing, because they're definitely stressed out by what's happening, what tips could we give to somebody maybe in their late 70s?
Right, so first of all, it's also use our common sense and knowing that even though we're in a lockdown situation, right, in my case, for example, the last thing I'm going to do now is to start doing boxing when I've never done boxing in the past, right? And now I just want to try it out. So the risk of injury is also, quite high in my case. So I would recommend simple stretchings, right? Breathing exercises for sure, that helps to calm the stress response, stretchings, and very gentle, perhaps some chair yoga, that would be fantastic for them, and very gentle stretches and a little bit of cardio as well, right? You don't need to start, preparing to run a marathon now when you've never done it before you were locked down. So just taking things really easy and being mindful of just play, with a bit of common sense as well. And everyone knows what they can do or what they should not be doing.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody's never sort of done any breathing techniques before and closed their eyes and really, deep breathing and holding one nostril, I mean, just talk us through some basic tips then of getting into a state of mindfulness.
Okay, so the very first technique that I would recommend is to practice belly breathing, right? Mm-hmm. And the benefits of diaphragmatic breathing is enormous, and I always recommend that. Diaphragmatic breathing is very, very simple to practice. So you need to focus on bringing the breath all the way down into the lower part of the belly, all right? And with that, we activate also the vagus nerve. right? So in very simple terms, you can practice in lying down or sitting on a chair, sitting on the sofa, and just simply being really aware of how you breathe in at the very beginning, and then slowly start transferring the breath all the way down to the belly. That sometimes is really difficult, especially if someone has what we call reverse breath, which is very common in anxiety. People, and it's really common, Steve, if you see it, you say to someone, take a deep breath, and straight away they do this, right? And they lift the shoulders. So what we want to do in belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing.
Can I just say, Sherry, I was one of those.
Yeah.
Because when my doctor used to tell me to breathe in, of course, when you breathe in, your stomach should come out.
Yeah.
I would breathe in, and my stomach would go in completely the opposite.
Yes. So that's called reversed breathing, and it needs practice, right? There's nothing to do with a dysfunction in your lungs or dysfunction in the diaphragm, not necessarily, but it just needs practice. So when you are in a state of relaxation or when you're calm, your belly should go out as you inhale, and then as you exhale, belly should come in. Right? So it's a very simple technique. It's called diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing.
And for most people, is that better to get some nice relaxing music on in the background, block out any distractions and noise, put your headphones on? Is it best to have a quiet room to really practice doing this to start off with?
I recommend having a quiet space, right? But I've also seen, and it's very interesting, Steve, I used to always recommend just getting to a quiet room and practice these techniques. Sometimes for people, it strangely works just to be around their family and doing these techniques also while they observe their relatives. It's really interesting, but I'm just leaving it out there because sometimes, everyone is different. So, but ideally you should have a quiet room, a quiet space for you to practice this, but obviously do as it works for you.
Quiet space, but do whatever works for you, sitting down or lying down. And just to start off with, that simple basic thing of when I'm breathing in, does my stomach expand? And when I'm breathing out, does it contract? And if it doesn't, try and get into that rhythm. And when you get into that rhythm, just really be mindful of the movement of the air going down into the stomach. Is that's the advice? Yeah,
that is the advice. Yeah, and it's really interesting because as you're doing all these techniques, your mind is really focused on what you're doing. Therefore, you're already practicing mindfulness as you do your belly breathing. There's no time to listen to the chattering of the mind anymore. You really focus on how I'm expanding the breath. Am I doing it correctly? Yes or no? So that's also a form of mindfulness.
One question and I don't know the answer, it's one I've always asked, is that why do we need to do this when we're sleeping, hopefully for 7 or 8 hours a night? So aren't we doing that anyway when we're asleep, or when we're asleep, do we not get the same benefits as when we do it when we're awake?
We do get more benefits when we do it consciously.
Okay.
Definitely. But it's basically a practice that the body does it on its own when we are in a relaxing state, such as when we sleep. However, when we practice this technique consciously, right, we can also activate the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is closely related to the parasympathetic nervous system. Therefore, our stress response slows down.
And if our stress response slows down, inflammation slows down, our defense system goes up. So should corona come knocking on the door, if we're in an unstressed situation, then it's got to be better for our defenses. Look, we've got so many questions coming in, Sherry. So let's go straight to the internet. So here's the first question, Sherry. This is from MG. Is walking associated with lowering stress in a scientific way?
Very interesting question, and the answer is yes. If you can also, this person can also find some resources in the research studies done on earthing, which is the act of walking barefoot on the ground.
Yep.
So yeah, very interesting study, and the answer is yes. The research studies proven that.
Thank you very much indeed, MG. Thank you for your question. Marvelous music. That's a great name. Good morning, Steve. Play piano. Good for exercising the hands. Best exercise for the brain, as it involves both left and right hemisphere of the brain. It involves both the analytical and the emotional sides. Absolutely marvelous. And you know, back to the government's advice of learn something new, and or maybe not new, maybe you used to play the guitar, and maybe you've got a guitar in the loft, or maybe you've got a little piano that you haven't used for ages. Get it back out, because music is just so good for the soul, and like you say, great for rebalancing the brain. And great question there from Marvelous. Get into playing an instrument if you've got one at home already, because that is it scores on so many different levels. And we just lost Sherry. We'll get her back in just a second. And just to say that I want to keep recapping the 5 things the government are saying for mental wellness. That link, by the way, of de-stressing decreases inflammation, decreases cortisol. Cortisol is a response in the body to stress, and if we have too much of it, we get inflammation. If we have inflammation, it weakens our immune system. So the reason we're linking very, very much trying to de-stress during lockdown, because if we're highly stressed, if that virus was to knock on your front door, it's going to have a more serious effect. And that's why we're saying just turn off the news at night. It's not telling us anything new at the moment. We know we should socially distance. We know we should wash our hands. So just turn off the news. In fact, in a moment, we're going to have Dr. Asim Malhotra on. And after about show 3, he said to me, Steve, get rid of the ticker tape along the bottom with the news. He said, because you're just reminding people about how bad everything is at the moment. We don't need to know. Just socially distance. Wash your hands, please, and turn off the blinking news. Right, Cherie's back. So let's go to some more questions. But a great one there by Marvelous. Get your instruments back out. Poppy says, what daily routine tips would you suggest in lockdown to keep stress levels as low as possible?
Right. Good question, Poppy. Try to follow a routine as much as possible. And I know, that there's so many recommendations out there, but this is one of the most important ones. Personally, if I don't have a routine in my day, I'm lost. I'm done. So try to follow a routine. Look after what you eat. That's hugely important, as you've been recommended in your show constantly. Try to find time to unwind, perhaps practicing some mindfulness, a bit of yoga. Try to find also time to be connected to your friends, family, relatives, right? Be part of a community.
That's really good advice.
Yeah.
Really good advice.
So these are the most important points: a routine, physical movement for your mind, unwind, try to stop the news a bit. That's to protect your mental health, and be part of a community. Have the feeling that you belong to someone somewhere, and they're still there for you, and you're still for them.
That's really, really good advice. And even if you are locked up like my mum and dad are, locked up's the wrong word, locked down. Sometimes my dad should be locked up. But if you are locked down like my parents at the moment, I know that they are doing exactly what we've been saying. They are contacting cousins that they haven't spoken to for a long, long time. They've been talking to my Auntie Vera every day. And it just is that sense of using this time to speak to people maybe you haven't spoken to for such a long time. That's great.
Yes, absolutely.
Great advice, Sherry. MG says, please cover in food fact content paneer, which is an Indian style cottage cheese. Jack, let's do that tomorrow. Yeah. We'll look into that one for you, MG. Samuel says, what's the best course of action to take if someone has a panic attack, says Samuel, because I guess that is kind of more likely at the moment. So if somebody has a panic attack, I've been there in the past myself, actually called an ambulance twice for it, and they came out and said there was nothing wrong with it. What's the best thing if somebody has a panic attack? Okay.
Before we jump into the techniques straight away, it's important to mention that there's an emotional response to a situation, right? Which is mostly depend on our coping abilities and personality type. And that's when also mindfulness comes into the picture, because it helps you to build that resilience. When we are having a panic attack, right, from the moment that we are experiencing the very mild symptoms to the full explosion of the panic attack, there is a window in which we can be in control. We can see AM, and that is when we really need to try to get the anxiety under control. So the first thing that I would recommend, and I also do with my patients or clients as well, is to slow down and breathe straight away. That's the first thing. The reasons why is because, going back to what I explained already, we are targeting the vagus nerve, right? And as a consequence, we slow down the stress response straight away. Okay, so the arousal of the sympathetic nervous system slows down, right? And as we practice belly breathing, the body slows down, therefore the mind slows down as well. Right, so that's the most important tip that I would give: to slow down, to stop, start breathing and acknowledging what's going on, right? And just getting rid of the fact that you want to be in control, right? Because then we create attachment to an outcome that might or might not happen, right? So just being in that present moment, breathe in and trying to slow down the respiratory rate, trying to slow down your heart rate as well, and acknowledging that that's what's going on in this present moment, right? And slowly, as you notice that you calm yourself down, you say, I'll let it go. So you slowly start letting go of the fact that you want to be in control of that situation, because that creates resistance, right? And again, the attachment to an outcome that might not be the best thing for you to do when you are in that full explosion of the anxiety.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. I had it twice in 1999, and it's very, very frightening when it happens to you the first time. And that's when I learned that the word fear is an acronym. And it's an acronym for false expectations appearing real. So don't think about the fear, oh, I'm having a heart attack. Chill out, forget fear, breathe slowly, not too deeply, nice and slowly. Great advice. Now, before we take any more questions, let's get one of your best friends on the phone and one of my best friends on the phone, the absolutely brilliant cardiologist, Dr. Aseem Malhotra is with us right now. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, mate. How are you?
Oh, the beard's back.
Yeah, you know, that's what happens if I don't shave for 2 days.
How are you? Well, tell us what's happening in your world at the moment, my friend.
What's happening in my world? I suppose same as pretty much everyone else, you know, obeying the rules of lockdown, trying to keep physically and mentally fit during this time. Yeah, I said, do a bit of writing. I've got something coming up quite soon, hopefully just to add some more value for people's lifestyles. And something in terms of population health. So yeah, it's working on that as well. So
for those that don't know, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, cardiologist, and when we first met about a year and a half ago, you said, I'm trying to still, keep my hand in the wrong word, but rather than repair one person at a time, trying to save 1 million at a time, you then went off and wrote a brilliant book, did a great documentary, the Peyote diet, all around eating real foods and the effect eating real foods has on the health. Talk then about stress, inflammation, real foods, what we can do right now to try and reduce our anxiety in what is obviously a difficult time for so many people.
Sure. Well, I'm really glad first and foremost that you've had Sherry on giving her expert advice. I think there's an interesting story in terms of how I got to know Sherry, and that's one of our common patients, a patient who I saw who came to me for advice having had a heart attack several years ago, had dramatically transformed his life. So this is a chap who was relatively young, middle-aged, heavy smoker, sedentary, very high stress levels, and eating a pretty shocking diet. And he had a heart attack in his 40s, had a stent put in, and then he met Sherry. And Sherry basically transformed his life by primarily, first and foremost, focusing on getting his anxiety and stress down. And he was able to simultaneously change his lifestyle. And several years later, he comes to see me just for some advice in terms of moving forward. He's had no progression of his heart disease. He's in great shape. His health markers are perfect. So that's how we originally linked up. I was really curious to find out, who is this cardiac nurse he talks about that had managed his stress so effectively. And then I've been actually referring many of my own patients to Sherry since then, and the feedback is just phenomenal. It's outstanding. So I think that then links into, what does the science and evidence tell us around stress and chronic disease? We know it's a big risk factor for heart disease. It's estimated 75 to 90% of all these chronic diseases, whether it's heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, cancer, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, all have a root or link to chronic stress. You've talked about it with Sherry about the pathophysiology behind it, and obviously stress hormones, chronic inflammation. So that's all been covered. So I think this is something that needs more of an understanding and airing, but then more importantly is about what can people do about it. And certainly, in my own life, a lot of you, people who are listening have probably had periods of extreme stress, and many people have dealt with it in different ways. I personally have probably used exercise, moderate activity as my way of kind of handling my stress. In fact, if I don't exercise, then I get stressed because I find it very therapeutic for me. But beyond that, it also again links into mindfulness, meditation, getting a good sleep. So I think it's something that is not just part of what we should be doing. I think it's central and crucial for everybody to be thinking about their stress levels and what they can do practically to reduce it, to improve their overall health. But also, interestingly, we find, we've talked about diet a lot, as you know, on the program, Steve. People, when they're stressed, tend to also consume the kind of foods that are going to make their health worse.
Yes.
If you reduce your stress, you're more likely to adhere to eating healthier foods as well. So I think you've got to think about it as an adjunct to that, to improving your diet too.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, in the sense that maybe dealing with stress comes before even diet, because maybe if you're really stressed, it's almost like, oh, sod it, I'll just carry on eating the junk food. So maybe this is such a great time to be talking about how do we de-stress, especially when more people are working from home, people are locked down, more time on their hands.
Absolutely. I think, Steve, one other thing to kind of a myth that needs to be busted out there, and this is, of course, anecdotal from experience but several patients I've seen who are otherwise very physically fit. I'm talking about guys in their middle age with six packs, okay, who are, sometimes in many cases over-exercising, eating not, a ridiculously bad diet, not perfect, and they've had heart attacks. And they come to see me, and they've got six packs. They've got no excess body fat. And when you do a deep dive into their lifestyle and how they've been, stress comes out as the biggest factor.
Asim, well, you know this story, and is happy for me to say a very, very close friend of ours. One of the doctors that helped me start Primal Living, Dr. Shan Hussain, fit, eats the right food, went to the gym one morning last September, did his exercises, came home, was just about to go to the surgery where he practices as a GP, had a heart attack. And he came to see you, but luckily he survived, and he's on the mend, and he came to see you and say, why on earth did this happen to me? And you said to him, on your level of 1 to 10, how stressed have you been in the last 5 years? And he said to me, I'd never thought about that before. I'm just busy being a doctor. And he said, I had to answer it honestly. And he said, I've been at level 8 for 5 years in a row. And there's a very healthy man that knows exactly what to eat, that exercises. So stress is really important, isn't it? So we have to find a way to manage it.
Yeah, I think on that point as well, Steve, one thing I worry about with a lot of frontline staff at the moment who are getting exposed to, the COVID-19 because of lack of PPE is combine that with the extra stress they must be under, and that, conceptually, of course, it's very difficult to precisely measure this, but almost certainly that is going to be an extra risk factor for them getting more severe illness and catching so it's a really bad vicious cycle. But again, this isn't, it's a difficult time to talk about this, but it needs to be mentioned that the baseline health, this whole issue about chronic disease, poor diet and stress affects everybody, every demographic group, doesn't matter whatever background you come from. But even doctors and nurses, and I've talked about this at length, I've campaigned on this issue about the fact that the hostel food environment is no better than the high street. In many cases, it's worse. Yeah. And more than 50% of our 1.4 million NHS employees are overweight or obese. And that probably misses a huge chunk, as in the population who have a normal weight and still have chronic metabolic disease because of poor diet and lifestyle. So we're all vulnerable to this. And, it's something that I think there are a few people that are willing to talk about it up front, but I think for a lot of the profession, unfortunately, because they are part of this problem, they are somehow embarrassed to really, understandably, to speak about the fact that our baseline health in this country, in America, in the UK, amongst doctors and nurses, as well as the general public, is dire.
Sure. Tell everybody that story that you told me about when the sort of tipping point for yourself when you just, I think, put a stent in or had a patient, and then he told you about the meal they gave in the hospital as a case in point of why we need to change.
Yeah, I mean, this is, going back several years, I was a specialist registrar working at Harefield in London, which is a big cardiac centre. And I was on call overnight, and we got up in the middle of the night to treat a patient for an emergency heart attack, and we put a stent in. And the next morning on the ward round, this chap was in his 50s, wasn't classically, particularly overweight or obese, but he had increased belly fat. So waist circumference is a much better predictor of metabolic syndrome, again, which is probably the biggest cluster of risk factors. In fact, is by far the biggest cluster of risk factors linked to heart attacks. And when I was giving him lifestyle advice, at that point, of course, we went through the classic, junk food versus non-junk food, but telling him, to follow a healthy diet, stop smoking, etc. He gets served a burger and fries by the hospital very casually. And he looks at me and says, "Doc, how do you expect me to change my lifestyle if you're serving me the same crap that probably brought me here in the first place?" But that illustrates the point that we have normalized these junk foods as part of the daily diet, with a lack of acknowledgement about how quickly dietary changes can improve health markers, but also how damaging poor diet is as well to health.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's not widely acknowledged amongst the medical profession. A lot of people watching this now are going to be members of the public, and they have this intrinsic knowledge. They think that doctors know this stuff. They don't understand the complexities or around how food is so important to metabolic health. They do not, because it's not something we're taught at medical school. I learned this many years after graduating, many years after becoming a specialist registrar in cardiology, and we're in a very competitive environment within cardiology, the kind of exams we have to take and all that kind of stuff. We do a lot of we learn a lot of things, but we learn very little about probably the most important influence on health at the moment, which is diet.
Well, I can probably say it's stronger than you because you are a doctor. Interviewing so many doctors like yourself for the book I wrote, you all told me the same story, which is, 5, 6, 7 years medical school. And they all varied a little bit, from one doctor saying nothing on nutrition to other doctors saying 2 or 3 days. And yet, don't get me wrong, the NHS is brilliant. Doctors are amazing. They're all at the front line at the moment. But my understanding is what you learn in med school is post-event, as opposed to, it's about cure rather than prevention. Very little on prevention, because we're all learning now, aren't we, that metabolic syndrome, so all the things you mentioned earlier, maybe even cancer, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer, Parkinson, can all be linked to metabolic syndrome, which at its heart can have poor food choices as one of the biggest sort of contributing factors. Therefore, surely we've got to change the education system for the medical.
Oh, Steve, it is the biggest. I don't think it is the biggest factor behind metabolic syndrome. All the other things are extremely important, but in that hierarchy, you need to get your eating right. You can't outrun a bad diet, and poor diet now globally is responsible for more disease and death than physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol combined. Part of this narrative over the years as well.
Can you just say that one more time, because that is such a powerful statement.
Poor diet is responsible for more disease and death than physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol combined.
Wow. Amazing.
And one of the things we needed to do, and one of the things I've advocated for, is pushing that narrative to the forefront, because, and there are still people out there that think they can outrun their fork, or they can eat what they like as long as they exercise. I sometimes hear people, I used to hear people in the gym anyway, not so much anymore, thankfully, but people in the men's locker room having a chat with each other, all these guys lifting weights, a bit of belly fat, saying, you can eat what you like, you can eat junk food as long as you burn it off. Absolute nonsense. Absolute, complete unscientific nonsense, and harmful
Yeah.
And sadly, that message has been propagated, surprise, surprise, by the junk food industry. That's part of their corporate playbook. That's how they deflected from their own culpability in the obesity epidemic, the way they market foods, the way they effectively lie to people about health foods. I mean, that's what it's legalized lying is some of this marketing. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. And people get sick and then they come in to the hospital because they've been lied to. And for me, that's the biggest scandal.
Yeah, well, same here. You know, I was obese for 25 years. And yet I was on every single diet. I wasn't trying. I tried everything, but I was obese. And the reason I called it Fat and Furious, I'm so furious that I just fell for all those lies. You know, I'm supposed to be an intelligent businessman, and yet I believed breakfast was the most important meal of the day. I believed that you carb loaded before a marathon. I believed that you had energy drinks while you were working out in the gym. I believed all that stuff because how could that be a lie on all that packaging? I believed that zero fat yogurt must be good for you. It's even on the side of bloody lorries going up and down the motorway even today, you know, and yet it's all a big fat lie.
Steve, you go back to the 50s, there were doctors advertising the benefits of cigarettes.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a lack of knowledge, isn't it? So let's come back. How are we doing for time? We've got a bit of time. So come back to today's topic then. How can stress cause inflammation? So I think we worked on that bit earlier on, that stress increases inflammation. Inflammation can cause a breakdown of the immune system. Breakdown of the immune system means that we haven't got the best defense should COVID or the flu come knocking on the door. And Sherry's given us some really good tips. The NHS have got 5 tips on their website. Give us, Dr. Seema Lotra's sort of tips that, while we've all got a bit more time on our hands, especially this Easter weekend, but also during lockdown or working from home, what do you think we should be doing to try and de-stress in what is obviously a very stressful time?
Yeah, I can't really add much more in terms of Sherry's expert advice on this and really helpful practical tips. You know, there are some apps out there that people can download. I've used one called Calm that I find very effective, which essentially just, you know, you listen to this app and it talks you through being mindful, ideally combining it with, deep breathing and slowing your heart rate down, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, etc. I think people should see it almost like having medicinal value, if you like. You know, the effects of this, if you do this regularly, you know, will increase over time. And it's not that it's just beneficial during the time period you're doing it. It will have a long-lasting effect if you do it regularly, you know. And if you can do it for 20 minutes a day or more, then fantastic. That's what I would suggest you do. I think we also need to be mindful about how we interact with people. You know, one of the things I think we've talked about before, Steve, on the program is, you know, having less stress is also linked to our feelings of happiness and sense of well-being. And when you look at the science on happiness, the single biggest determinant of happiness is meaningful relationships. So how are we connecting with people, I think, is really crucial. You know, it's of course very challenging, or more challenging right now. We're in lockdown. So people may be doing whatever they can using things like Zoom or FaceTime or with their partners that they're living with, etc. But I think it's really important to just think about that, especially when we come out of it. We need to change the relationship. We need to change how we connect or think about how we connect with each other. Social media, okay, so of course we all rely on it. It's a great platform to get information out, and we're all doing this. You know, I have Facebook posts and Instagram or whatever, Twitter, but I also realize we're probably all overdosing on it as well, and that also is having a negative impact on people's brains and people's mental health. Yeah. You've mentioned earlier about turning the news off. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've now personally got in a routine where I'm just going to see the news once a day, maybe the update on what's happening in terms of the COVID deaths and info on lockdown. But if you just watch the news all day right now, it'll send any sane person into depression. Yeah. So how much do you need to know, and for what length of time? I would just stick to seeing the news once a day. I've got a routine in the morning. I do not turn the TV on till after lunchtime. You know, I wake up in the morning, I do some reading. I mean, that links also slightly to a friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Phil Hammond, is a GP, has got a great mnemonic about how you should lead your life mentally and physically. He uses a mnemonic, clangers. Okay. So C is connect, yeah. L is learn. Yeah. You know, are you learning something every day? I find for me, learning something new, even if it's reading for half an hour, for me is actually a great therapy for my mind. Mm-hmm. You know, A is be active. Mm-hmm. N is notice. So that's again being mindful. Yeah. You know, where are we up to? And G, geez, give back. So it's about being compassionate. You know, is there something you can do on a daily basis just to help somebody, whether you're having a conversation with a friend or, you know, giving something to charity or helping a neighbor? E is eat well. We all know about that. Really important. So we're up to clangers. E. A. Hold on. No. R. Relax. Right. Meditation, mindfulness, and S is sleep. Getting a good sleep.
That's great.
So I think that's a really good kind of sort of framework for everybody to be thinking about.
I'm going to rewind this later and write that down. Clangers. I love it. I love it. I thought the ERS was going to be eat real stuff at the end.
Well, I'm actually going to change it for my second book. I'm going to ask permission from Phil, who I know, but also somebody on my Facebook who I'll have to quote came up with, I think, a kind of modified one of that, which may sound a bit better than clangers. Cleansers. So something similar, but cleansers.
Yeah, great. Shall we go to the floor, go to the internet and see what people are asking questions? MG says gardening is also suggested to relieve stress. Do you agree? 100%. Yeah, 100%. Because you're out in nature, and also getting out in the sunshine at the moment will up our vitamin D levels, and vitamin D levels will help reduce so many different things. Will also help release our happiness neurotransmitters. So getting out in the garden, we all agree with that one, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people. One who I will not name, who's extremely famous elderly actor. I shouldn't really call him elderly because he's super fit in his 80s. And he's told me, and we've spoken about this at length. And he said that for him, gardening is his therapy. And he's you know, because you're also, it's not just about being out in nature, but even the physical aspect that you're squatting quite a lot as well, right? You're squatting, you're standing up, you're squatting, etc. So you're getting actually some very good physical activity through gardening too.
So you're getting exercise, you're maybe doing a new hobby, so you're learning something new, what to plant, when to plant. You're connecting with nature. Sherry would probably say do it barefoot as long as you don't have your garden fork anyway, as long as you've not got your garden fork near your feet, maybe do it barefoot and connect with nature even more. So yeah, we like that one, MG. Question for Seem, how important is resting heart rate? Does this go up with stress? How can this be reduced? Great question.
So the answer to that question is yes. Resting heart rate is important. I wouldn't obsess about it though. I mean, sometimes I have patients coming to me who literally getting stressed because their resting heart rate is 70 beats a minute as opposed to 55. There's nothing wrong with them, and they're getting stressed about that, right? So, you know, it can vary from person to person. Elite athletes, interestingly, will drop their heart rates quite considerably at rest. So, you know, some of them can have, I've seen patients in heart rates in their 30s and 40s completely fine. So it is important. I wouldn't obsess about it. But yeah, what's more important than resting heart rate, and Sherry maybe want to add something on this, is heart rate variability. So that's actually with breathing, how your heart rate varies. And that actually can be a marker of it's not perfect, but it's a kind of reasonably crude estimate of your levels of stress. And there are apps out there that can tell you your heart rate variability, and they coincide with your stress levels. And when people start reducing their stress, usually through deep breathing or mindfulness, that heart rate variability improves.
Totally the same. That's brilliant. And just to add on a little bit more, that's also one of the main outcomes that we look for when we deal with people who have severe stress and anxiety. So it's to increase the heart rate variability, and that proves the benefits of breathing, because when you slow down your respiratory rate, you also slow down your heart rate, and you increase the heart rate variability, which is the space between each beat of the heart. So yeah, great to add that, the same things.
Yeah, no, and actually, in addition to that, Steve, we talked about it in the podcast with Sherry, if you remember. One other aspect is people sometimes like, how much does the brain control the body? The fact that you can, within minutes, even seconds actually, slow your heart rate down just from your mind is the best example of how the mind can control physiology.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Such a valid point. Totally agree. Alba 5 says, is there an ideal rate to aim for when exercising? In other words, too high equals stressful, too low equals no benefit while exercising.
Yeah, I think any level of exercise, Steve, first of all, is better than no exercise. But there is probably what we call a J-shaped curve. I think if people do too much, then in terms of observational data, they get to a point where, they may be increasing their risk of harm versus moderate activity. We talked about last time, if you remember, that if you do lots of exercise, more than an hour of quite intense exercise a day, then you're actually more likely to get respiratory infections. Like you're 4 times more likely to get, respiratory infections than someone who does moderate activity, for example. So I think you've got to think about that from that perspective. But yeah, a very nice, relatively easy way of people knowing they're getting enough exercise is to measure their heart rate. Now, there's so many apps out there, but people can also check their pulse. You want to be getting 30 minutes of moderate activity 5 times a week. In terms of cardiovascular benefits, in terms of all the evidence linked to cancer, dementia, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, moderate activity seems to be the best. And to measure that, you want to be getting your heart rate to between sort of 50 and 70% of its target consistently for 30 minutes, 5 times a week. How do you calculate your target? Everyone listening, it's 220 minus your age, and then between 50 and 70% of that.
Yeah.
So say you're a 40-year-old male, your maximum target heart rate is going to be 180. 220 minus 40 is 180. Half of that is 90. And you want to get, between maybe 90 and 110 beats a minute, something like that, and maintain it for 30 minutes. So that's what I would say is moderate activity. You can do that when you're doing a brisk walk as well.
That's a really, really good point. And in the book, and by the way, everybody watching, if you haven't got my book, get a little shameless plug right now. On Amazon, I've dropped the Kindle price down to £3.99, and all that profit goes to the Trussell Trust. So all copies we're selling during lockdown, 100% of the profit going to the Trussell Trust. And in there, when it comes to exercise, I have a view called MOMS, because we all have our acronyms. And mine is max out. So when you're doing any weight training, try and max out, not heavy weights. And then move more. And what do I mean by move more? I mean walk. Get out and just walk. And then eventually, when you get super fit, add some sprinting. But what I don't believe in anymore, and this is really interesting because Kenneth Cooper, who in the late 60s coined the phrase aerobics, and Kenneth Cooper, so he's the guy that invented aerobics, and at the time nobody was jogging around the world, and then all of a sudden within 2 years 30 million people were jogging because Kenneth Cooper said jogging's good for cardiovascular. Just recently he's done a complete U-turn, and he said, I always thought more was better. And he said, I've been training presidents, athletes, and I've now realized in my old age that more is not better. There's an optimum. I'm with you, seeing that up to maybe half an hour is probably the best thing to do, because more damages the joints, too much more. In fact, there are even some researchers that not now that too much cardiovascular disease actually damages the heart itself.
Yeah, too much exercise can increase coronary calcification. Probably about 11% of elite athletes do get quite significant coronary calcification. It's thought, however, though, they're still at lower risk, but it's ideally something you want to avoid. I think Ken Cooper's right. I mean, every single orthopedic surgeon I know, know several, said no one should be running on the road. They're seeing more and more people in their 40s and 50s needing knee and hip replacements because they're just damaging their joints from running. So I'm not against running. I think it depends on individual body type as well. Some people can handle it better. I used to be a runner. I started to get some issues with my knees in terms of, pain, etc. I now cycle. I've converted to cycling. Yeah. Albeit because I ruptured my Achilles recently, I've been doing it in the gym. But actually, it's amazing. I feel physically so much better from cycling than I do from running in terms of the next day, my energy levels. I don't have joint pains, etc. So it's anecdotal, of course, but it makes sense. Think about doing an exercise that is going to give you the best cardio benefit, but with minimizing, harm to your joints and body.
Brilliant. Now, we're really, really short on time. In fact, we're over, but there are so many great questions. Quick, short answers to these, if possible. Right, from Marvellous. Very difficult to distress older people like parents. Any idea for them, please? I need a de-stress session after calming my mother.
I'll let Sherry take this one.
So what was the question again? Sorry, Steve.
It's what's the best thing for older people to distress older people?
Well, It's a really broad question, right? So maybe the techniques that I share, like mindfulness and relaxation, might not work for them. So find something that they enjoy, right, and help them to achieve that. Perhaps it's gardening. Perhaps it's a nice chat with them, talking about something different that is not Corona and is not the news. So
Yeah.
it really depends. If they're willing to practice mindfulness or practice a bit of, chair yoga, that would be fantastic. Go for it.
My mother has got early onset dementia, used to love reading, can't read anymore because she gets to the end of the page, she's forgot what she's doing. But what we found is jigsaws work for mum. And I think everybody's different, aren't they? So, we've got loads of jigsaws and she's finding
Can I
that.
just add something else, Steve? I think this also relates to the social interaction stuff. There's some interesting data out there, certainly in elderly care homes, for example, that stroking a pet can be really beneficial for some of these older patients. And of course, it's a bit of a difficult one to discuss right now, but I am very curious. I'm thinking aloud here as well. Sherry may know the science on this, but what about hugging? Just generally hugging each other.
Oh, yes.
Prolonged hugging probably is very beneficial for your mental health and reducing stress, especially with loved ones. Not just randomly going up to people on the street, but
thanks for saying. But according to research, hugging for 6 seconds can lower significantly your cortisol level. 6 seconds.
Wow.
Great.
Yes.
I've been telling people 7, so I wasn't far off.
Well, 1 more second for you, Sim.
You're just greedy, Sim. You're just greedy. And in fact, think about this. What Jack did yesterday, his grandmother lives just around the corner. We've got 2 dogs at home. We don't need 2 dogs at home right now. And she's self-isolating. So he took one of the dogs round just to give her company for the next few weeks. And I don't know, I've probably broke loads of rules by doing that. But right, next one. Question, how can you reduce production of cortisol in our bodies? Is there a drug to reduce cortisol?
Well, there's no real drug specifically that reduces cortisol that I'm aware of, but all the things we've already spoken about, really.
Brilliant.
The problem is the measurements of cortisol are not also the most reliable. A lot of people use salivary cortisol, so it's not something that necessarily people need to be doing. I think the best way to know if your stress is reduced is subjective. If you're stressed, if you're not stressed.
Okay, next one from Samuel. I'll name this one at Asim, although it says for both. Damage, stroke, inflammation to the body. Can damage, stroke, inflammation to the body be undone with stress relieving techniques? Can we undo damage?
You can reduce inflammation. There's definitely good studies showing that happens when you're reducing stress. Undoing damage, I suppose it depends in what context. One of the areas of interest that myself and Sherry are looking at is around heart disease reversal, or certainly stopping the progression of heart disease. Reducing stress does appear to be a significant factor. It still needs to be tested in the most rigorous randomized controlled trials, and I'm working on designing something and putting that out hopefully soon. To really try and prove that to be the case. But the evidence so far does suggest that it does have an impact, certainly in reducing progression of heart disease. Whether true reversal can occur is unknown, but probably yes.
Great.
Yeah, it's great the same.
And then the rest are some just great comments. Marvelous says the brain needs reading, writing, and memorizing. I think that's a really, really, really good point.
That's a brilliant point. Yes.
Yeah. Reading, writing, off the technology, back to using our hands and reading from paper, etc., etc.
I'll also add a very funny anecdote on that, Steve, as well. Growing up, as a lot of parents, maybe more specific without being stereotyping too much with Indian parents, a lot of expectation on the kids to do well at school. The first thing my dad would ask me every time he'd pick me up from school when I was at primary school, any marks? Did you do any tests today? And what did you get? That was the first question. Now, some people might find that kind of high pressure, but anyway, I dealt with it. Actually, now, you do things as a kid, as an adult, to get to a certain point. You've got to pass exams, etc. But what's really interesting now, in terms of my own thinking, my own life, I find reading, memorizing, writing, etc., extremely therapeutic. I do it therapeutically. I don't do it because I have to do it. So, that's just an interesting point I thought I'd add in there.
Yeah, I also used writing as a way of therapy.
Yeah, that's a great advice. There's a brilliant book that I recommend to everybody called Dominic O'Brien, Memory Techniques. He was the world memory champion. And within 2 or 3 days, you can learn how to memorize a whole entire pack of playing cards. And just getting that, again, there's something to get into new. If you want to know how to memorize a pack of playing cards, you say, well, that's impossible. It can be done. You could even, I've got terrible memory, and yet I learned how to do it. That's
pie.
Say again?
Or pie.
Or pie. Yes, Jack. Camera on Jack for a second. Jack. No, come on, Jack. You put yourself on the spot. Jack said he memorized. How many can you remember of pi? Go on then, son.
Not many, but
Go on.
I'm not doing that.
Go on. Can you remember? Go on, go for it.
Okay, 3.141, 5926, 53589, 7932, 8462, 6433, something else.
Did you hear that? It was about the first 30 digits of pi there with a memory technique. Children these days. Big thank you to the NHS for all the hard work you're doing, says Primal. Lynn says, love a good hug. Lynn also says, clangers, she loves it. She likes that. Marva says, great idea, Steve. Jigsaws, yes, and reading. I think we've come to the end of the show, guys. You've been brilliant as always.
Steve, if I may interrupt, yes, thank you to all the NHS, and I would love to add something. It's very close to my heart. It's an initiative and a project that I developed for the NHS and for healthcare professionals. So we have developed a completely free online course for all the NHS out there that are risking their lives. And it's a program that deals with resilience, managing emotions, mindfulness, and breath work. So if anyone, everyone can support that work, that'd be absolutely wonderful. The trainings aim to be online next week.
And what's it called?
I'm happy to put a link below. It's Arrhythmia Breath online training for NHS.
Oh, fantastic. So if you put a link onto this video, I mean, feel free to put it on the link to every single one we do in the series, and we'll try and promote that for you.
Thank you.
Asim, take care. Happy writing this afternoon. Thank you for coming on the show, mate. And love to get you back on next week at all, if possible. Until then, take care, everybody.
Keep up the great work, mate. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for joining us. That was the brilliant Sherry, the amazing Asim Malhotra. And thank you at home for bringing us so many questions throughout the show. Remember, what we're about is helping you get through this difficult time. At the same time, if you can make a donation, that would be really, really appreciated. The food banks right now, they've got more demand than ever. More people going without meals in the UK, going hungry, malnourished because of these difficult times we're in. Let's support each other. Make a small donation if you can via text, or go to justgiving.com. The food banks are working so hard to feed the nation, but they've got less people donating food. They've got less volunteers able to run those centres at the moment because of social distancing, and therefore more people are starving in the UK than ever before. Please, please, please do make a donation. And Jack, just quickly before we wind up, we ask you every day to guess how much sugar is in something you might eat regularly. Well, here's one you can't be eating right now because they're all closed. Hooray! If I could have found a way to shut down McDonald's, Greggs, KFC, all those fast food places that have been causing obesity, been causing metabolic syndrome, I would have done it. But it's been done for us. Anyway, next time they do open, how much does your little small portion of fries turn into in terms of sugar inside the bloodstream? I'll leave you with that thought today, and we will answer that one for you tomorrow. Please do hit the share button below and tell somebody about the program if you can. We need to grow the audience base to get more funds for the Trussell Trust. Please do hit the notification, the reminder. Please do subscribe. Until tomorrow, have a great Easter Friday. Stay safe. Do something for the first time you've never done before. Stay healthy. Be mindful. Maybe try some of those breathing techniques, and we'll see you tomorrow.